So thank you for joining us, and I am now honored to welcome Sydney Burrows, who is presenting Art, Activism, and Sexual Violence, Healing Through Dance. And Sydney has shared that sensitive content in today's session will include general references to sexual assault and trauma. Over to you, Sydney.
Thank you. Thank you, Missy, so much. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I just like to acknowledge that this conference that the University of Rochester has been putting on for a few years now is incredible. And I'm very excited to be here presenting. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So today I'm going to be speaking about a chapter that I wrote recently for a book titled Art, Activism, and Sexual Violence. It was edited by Sally Kitch and Don Gilpin through the University of Washington Press. It was published in early 2024. So to just give you guys a little bit of a background about myself, I am a digital content strategist at the University of Rochester Medical Center. And in addition, I am a dance writer for Rochester City Magazine. I do a lot of reviews and previews. I cover a lot of the dance performance here in Rochester. I'm also a dancer myself. I perform regularly with Push Physical Theater as well as other Rochester dance organizations. I have a bachelor's in dance and English from Goucher College and my master's in English from the University of Rochester. So this book, Art, Activism, and Sexual Violence, edited by these professors from Arizona State University, it shows how creative expression can be used to expose, prevent, and combat sexual violence. It features multiple art forms, including dance, textile arts, painting, new media images, drama, and other creative forms. And each chapter was contributed by a different artist. It mostly includes analysis of sexual violence from feminist perspectives. Professors Gilpin and Kitch reached out to me in 2021. Oh, thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and swap my screen. Sorry about that. 1 second. Share. Okay.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I had it when Missy and I were on earlier, but for whatever reason, it swapped. So to pick up, this was an article I wrote called #MeToo Sexual Assault and the Arts. And it was published in Burnaway magazine in 2018. And this was a main reason that these professors connected with me and asked me to contribute to their book. In this article I wrote in 2018, I analyzed different arts pieces like What Were You Wearing, which was an exhibition at the University of Florida in April 2018. It featured clothing worn by women at the time of their assault, and it was accompanied by statements from the anonymous stories. The University of Kansas and the University of Arkansas have since presented their own versions in their on-campus art galleries. And in addition to speaking about these exhibitions and other arts pieces about sexual assault, I looked at my own personal experiences in the dance world growing up. In dance, the body is the main focus, and this can contribute to a space for abuse. So this was an article that I wrote that kind of led to my contributing to this chapter for this book. In my chapter, I focused on finding choreographers who were creating work about sexual assault and sexual violence and aiming to educate audiences. I wrote using language that was ideally accessible for everyone, including those without knowledge of dance technique and terms. I also explore the ways in which dance can be used for storytelling and raising awareness, and the reasons that movement can be a really powerful tool to address sensitive topics that may be more difficult to address in other art forms that might be a bit more explicit in their approach. The 4 choreographic works that I looked at took place in anywhere from 2017 to 2021. I opened the chapter with some context about dance culture, as well as the background of the Me Too movement. So historically, young female dancers are under the direction of male choreographers and directors, and this has especially been true in ballet companies. This has changed, but this has been the kind of standard for many years. These persistent power imbalances can create environments where abuse can go unchecked. Dance is inherently competitive in its nature. And speaking from my own personal experiences, you're often taught that you are replaceable and that there's someone outside the studio door waiting to take your place. And this dynamic can make it really difficult for individuals to speak out due to the fear that someone else will just swap in for them. As I mentioned earlier, the body is the focus for dance. It's an art form that is beautiful with the use of the body as the vehicle of expression. But perfection is commonly expected in certain forms. And because of the focus on the body, dancers are hyper aware of their performance and their appearance. And this kind of adds an additional layer of pressure and complexity to the art form that isn't necessarily present in others. In my chapter, I specifically looked at an example of sexual assault allegations. Peter Martins, the director, retired in January 2018 amongst allegations. And later that year, a student of the filed a lawsuit against 3 male dancers in the company. These allegations made headlines due to the popularity and the prestige of the company, and the timing aligned with the height of the Me Too movement. But this is just one example. So in my research for this chapter, I came across these 4 incredible choreographers who were creating work at the time surrounding the topic of sexual violence and analyzing different ways that you can heal using dance and dance performance. I should mention that dance therapy is an entirely separate art form in itself, and that's movement therapy for the individual, for the everybody. But the works that I looked at were professional performances about this topic specifically. Jenna Parker is the first choreographer who I spoke with. She is based in New York City, and she created a piece, a choreo play technically called She, that told anonymous, true, personal stories of sexual trauma. They used dance, multimedia projections, music, and spoken word. The choreography for this piece was a mixture of modern technique and gestures. The company of dancers would perform behind 4 different actors who spoke monologues that told specific stories of sexual assault and abuse. It was created in 2017 and premiered off Broadway at Here Art Center. And after that performance, a audience member came up to Parker and said, quote, "I am she, and I've never told anybody else that." And for Jenna, this was kind of the most impactful moment that led her to continue the journey of this performance and bring it to multiple universities and performance spaces across the US. She told me that together, the cast experienced a sense of release and healing that many of them had not necessarily realized they needed. She went into this piece personally hoping that the artistic process and the performance would be healing for dancers and for the women whose stories she was telling. But she told me that through the process, she discovered that she had a story of her own that she had buried for many years. And this kind of made her think how many other women are out there have stories buried that maybe they haven't had the opportunity to acknowledge and heal from. So that was pretty powerful. I also spoke with this choreographer, Jamie Minkus. She's based in Portland, Oregon, and she dances with Rejoice Dance Theater. So in contrast to Jenna, Jamie went into this piece with the goal of healing from her own experience. She wanted to take her power back and use this performance as an opportunity to heal and to kind of begin the process for herself. She wanted to also reclaim her sexual liberation. So a lot of the movement highlights female strength, empowerment, and emphasizes the strength and power of the dancers, showing that despite adversity women face and the trauma that comes with sexual abuse, they were resilient and triumphed. The piece premiered in 2020 and it had 3 different performances. And after each performance, at least one person came up to Jamie after the performance and said, you know, I've had a similar experience and this was so meaningful to me. She had this quote that I included in the chapter that I wanted to read. She said, "The emotional response can be a very personal journey to the onlooker. Dance still gets to be a little bit masked. We're not saying anything. We're not telling you what it is. Rather, we're showing you." That gives the individual the space to take it personally. So I thought that this quote was a great kind of summary of the uniqueness of dance and movement, and the ways in which it can be used to address sensitive topics that may be more difficult to address with different art forms. The third choreographer I spoke with was Beth Braun. She is based in Tucson, Arizona. Her company, in contrast to Rejoice and Jenna Parker's company, performs at high schools. So Braun founded this group in 2011. She was inspired by her own daughter who had had an experience as a child, but didn't come out about it to her family until she was in her teens. Braun witnessed her daughter's struggle and saw how hard it was for her to talk about the experience as a teenager in that really vulnerable stage of her life. And so Braun was a dance teacher and had been working with kids of all ages at that point, and decided to start a company that used dance to connect with high school students specifically who may have had a similar story or experience to her daughter. The performances follow a script that was developed by Braun in collaboration with behavioral health professionals, and it encourages conversations about sexual violence. Curriculum also accompanies the performances to help guide students and counselors through conversations. And rather than telling specific stories like Jenna Parker's piece, for example, these performances just kind of try to portray a wide range of feelings and emotions that are commonly felt by survivors. Each piece kind of tackles a different emotion, from stress to anxiety, anger, depression, and hopelessness as well. What I thought was really special about this group of people is that all performers, interns, and board members of Esperanza Dance Project go through a pretty intensive advocate training to prepare them. So even the students that are performing, because the company has a wide range of ages, it's anywhere from high school students themselves to professional dancers and those later in their career. But everyone participates in advocate training to prepare for conversations that might be had after performances. I also spoke with Kevin Lee Green. He is the director of the company Tech Moja Dance Theater. They're based in Wilmington, North Carolina. He created his company in 2008 to address the lack of Black-led arts organizations in the coastal North Carolina region. He was struck by the lack of people of color that were represented in the Me Too movement, even though the creator of the movement, Tarana Burke, is a Black woman. And he decided to create his piece, Quiet as It's Kept, to try to amplify the voices of Black survivors that were not being represented in the Me Too movement. The piece and its title is inspired by the silence in the Black community surrounding sexual trauma. He told me that the title is drawn from Southern Black vernacular that symbolizes secrecy and unspoken truths in communities. Quiet as It's Kept, there were no marigolds in the fall of 1941 is also a line from The Blue Side by Toni Morrison. So that was the inspiration behind the title. So from my research for this chapter and from my own personal experience, it's clear that being a dancer and a performer and an artist of any kind can be a really vulnerable experience. The power dynamics in the dance industry really need to change to give dancers more power and assurance that if they speak up, they will not be replaced. They will not be terminated in their roles. Since I wrote this chapter, there have been many more cases unfortunately, of sexual violence and assault that have been exposed within the dance industry and specifically within the commercial dance space. So You Think You Can Dance, Break the Floor, which was a dance convention. They've had different allegations about different instructors and people of power. The stigma and criticism surrounding sexual violence that deters people in general from engaging with the topic also deters artists from and performers from speaking up about it. So looking forward, the good thing is that there has been a lot of progress. And since the peak of the Me Too movement, now many more dance teachers are asking permission or making statements ahead of class about touching for corrections, because that is another element that I don't think I mentioned, that in dance, touch is a technique used to correct and to point out what muscles need to be engaged, how weight needs to shift, and it can be really effective, but because of that, it can also blur the lines. So there are standards that are now being established and acknowledged in dance studios and dance classes. Dance companies and schools, in addition to this, are also starting to adopt explicit harassment policies and clarifying who to go to and specifying HR standards. So the works of the audience and artists of all kind in crucial conversations, and demonstrated the ways that dance can express unspoken experiences. In all of these performances, audience members and dancers reported a direct impact on their own healing processes. And so my hope is that there will be more artists sharing these stories, these topics. There will be more conversations, and by doing so, we can hope kind of for a cultural shift in the dance world. Thank you so much. I wanted to just give a few minutes in case there were any questions, and I wanted to open the floor. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
I really appreciate seeing the different examples from different parts of the country, and also that you're talking about now what, right? And that there are these policies starting to emerge, and we, in fact, too, in our program are writing a policy. I mean, we have a policy, but we haven't had a written policy. Now we have a written policy, and so I think it's just it's where we need to go.
Yeah. And I will say, I wrote this chapter a few years back, and edited throughout 2022, 2023. But since then, like you said, there have been a number of more policies taking place in schools and companies across the country. So that's encouraging. Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a question, Sydney. Hi. I really appreciated your research. I'm glad you did it. Um, I wonder if you discovered whether or not the embodied experience of dance for people who have had an experience with sexual assault in the past can serve as healing, even if they don't disclose the actual trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And like I had mentioned, dance therapy is a proven
Right.
form of healing as well. But in my conversations with these choreographers, I think it was Jenna who said that her dancers, they weren't sharing their personal experiences. Like you said, they weren't, it wasn't their stories that were being used, but they reported that through choreography, through performing alongside those monologues, they experienced their own, I guess, trauma in movement and healing process in movement. And that was something that she hadn't anticipated. She had gone into it hoping for conversation and awareness and to help the women whose stories they were telling. But yeah, what she didn't expect is that dancers were healing from the process as well.
Thank you.
I was just going to share that last night Heidi Latsky was talking about her personal experience having had a brain tumor, a benign brain tumor removed, etc. And it was quite, I mean, extensive. And the reason I bring this up is because the doctors kept saying, like we have to, we're concerned about PTSD and this kind of thing. And she said, but I'm processing the event. And I feel like dance is a way of processing big events like this, like such sexual assault. And so even if it's not about like spoken word therapy, right? It's a process of processing, right? And I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that was the one choreographer, Jamie Minkus. She had not initially planned to create a piece to have performed. She just wanted to kind of process her own experiences with her colleagues, with her dancers, and then through that experience determined like this needs to be seen, this needs to be experienced. And she was so nervous and really, really anxious about the performance. And she actually got very emotional speaking to me about it, because it was so personal and such a vulnerable thing for her to do. But to see the people come up to her after and say, you know, this happened to me too, and I've never told anyone that, was the most rewarding thing for her, you know, to say I was able to help someone else in the process, my own experience as well.
Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you so much, Sydney, for this really amazing work.